Guys, we finally got some movement going on in the transfer portal with these Gamecocks, and I know we've been talking about this for a couple weeks, but Jatius Gear finally is a Gamecock, going to add some depth to that edge position. Of course, the transfer originally from the upstate, but played last season, or played the past couple years, that is, out at Syracuse.
Yeah, I think this is something that was obviously, Chris, expected. And, I think Gamecock fans it wasn't a surprise, but it was still something that you should be excited about if you're a South Carolina fan. You always are looking, I think, especially with the portal, you're looking for situations where it makes sense on both ends. And I think for Gear, opportunity to get back home, opportunity to come back to his home state, opportunity to play in some warm weather, as opposed to up there. And for South Carolina, I mean, what have we talked about pretty much all offseason? Running backs and edges, that's the two positions, that's the two spots that we have felt they needed to go into the portal and sort of add either depth or starters. I think for Gear, this is a kid, it's now pretty obvious he was a little bit under-recruited out of high school. And, I think sort of burst onto the scene last year as a redshirt freshman with Syracuse, had a pretty big year, is a guy who can get into the backfield, was pretty productive last year, and will come right in now, obviously, with Sterling Lucas there at that edge spot and compete for a starting spot. I'm not ready to quite say 100%. This is my personal opinion. I'm not ready to quite say put him in ink as a starter this year, but I think two things. He's going to be in that conversation. He's going to be sort of in that competition for that spot. But also, this is not a one-year free agent hired guy, basically. He's got plenty of eligibility left, 3 years to go, and is someone who can come in and develop under Sterling Lucas.
Have you penciled him in?
I've not penciled him in either.
Okay. Well, I wrote today, we got two different pieces. We got more than two pieces. Got one piece that's already out inside the commitment this morning on GamecockCentral.com. Another coming out at 1 o'clock. Set your alarm, right? 1 o'clock, interview with his former high school coach at Belton Honeypath in the upstate. In one of those pieces, Wes, I mentioned he's penciled in as a starter for me. I'm also not using the ink pen. I'm not using the permanent marker. But I pencil him in. There's such a need here. And this is an interesting, intriguing player because he really did have that breakout year last season. He played in one game in 2021, true freshman year, preserved his red shirt, preserved a year of eligibility. And then last season, you saw him take a big step forward. Syracuse played at 13 games. He's played in 12 of those, started 12 of those. And then I think his numbers, 6.5 tackles for loss. I think he had 3.5 sacks, had some more quarterback hurries. He blocked a kick. So this is a guy with some versatility. I think he's good enough right now to, at a minimum, give them more than just depth. I don't think Jatius Gear is a guy where you're like, he can give you 15 snaps. That's not why you bring this guy in. He's going to play a good bit, and I think as soon as he walks on campus, he's going to make a really good case to be a starter, like if you're projecting it out. But he also, as you said, Wes, because he has added value because he has not fully reached his potential yet. He's still a young player. He's played 2 years. He's really played one season of actual college football. So that's valuable for the future, but he can also get better. This isn't a senior that's kind of a finished product, so to speak, who's reached his full potential and is now coming in and learning the new defensive system and all those things. If anything, it's kind of exciting because you saw some of the things he could do last year, and now he could get better. Also, a pretty big schematic change for him with how South Carolina's going to use him versus what he did at Syracuse. Syracuse, they played an odd front. They played three-man fronts. And so Gear a lot of times was lining up, head up on an offensive tackle. South Carolina, they're experimenting, of course. We've seen they've got some three-man fronts, some five-man fronts. But when they're in an even front, in a four-man front, Gear is a guy who's really adept and I think better suited and more natural as just that edge position in a four-man front.
Yeah, I'm penciling him into the rotation. I'm penciling him into
I'm etching him in stone into the rotation.
Into the too deep. I think we're more wait and see on just say, sometimes you get a guy out of the portal and you just say, all right, whether they give you the coach speak about everybody's competing, everybody's got to fight it out, blah, 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 blah. That's what coaches are supposed to say. We all know, oh, this guy's going to start. This guy's going to be in the starting lineup. In this case, I'm just not quite there yet. I'm kind of wait and see. That's no shot at him. I want to see, who else do they add from the transfer portal? I think they'll probably try to add at least one more. And then I think, B, I want to see how they decide to structure this defense. Because, I look at it, and if Elijah Davis plays the way he did in the spring game, and I know that's dangerous. I've seen enough college football to know that it's dangerous to start penciling guys in because of how they played during the spring. And certainly spring game, completely different ball game than what we'll call real football, fall football in the SEC. But here's the thing. Tonka Hemingway is going to be on the field, right? TJ Sanders was the defensive player of the spring. So I can't see naming him defensive player of the spring and him not being on the field as a starter. And then we know Jordan Strong is going to be on the field as well. You would very much assuming he's 100%. So that's, in my opinion, in my head, if I'm like mapping it out, that's 3 spots right there. So who is your next best player if you're getting the top 4 on the field? Is it Gear? Is it Elijah Davis? Is it Boogie Huntley? Boogie Huntley started the year last year as a starter above TJ Sanders.
Yep.
So, but I can't see Sanders being defensive player of the spring and not being a starter in the fall, assuming he keeps doing what he's been doing. So that's why, and don't get me wrong, this is a great conversation. As much as we've talked about edge being like this big concern, it's a great conversation that you're even talking about it right now. So I think some of it's going to depend on how they structure it. Some of it's going to depend on who your best 4 players are.
Well, and when you're talking about structuring it, so you mentioned a couple guys there, at least, that we've seen play inside and outside. Tonka Hemingway we know can do it. TJ Sanders did it some this spring. I think he's better. I like the idea more, Wes, and if you're running a 4-man front, certainly TJ Sanders being a tackle, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's, unless it's some kind of like run-heavy package where you're geared up to stop the run, you're down around the goal line. I like him as an attacking tackle in a 4-man front. Now, if you're in a 3-man front, okay. But so my question is, like, where are you putting Tonka? If you're thinking in terms of your best 4, is Tonka inside? Is he outside? Does it depend on your personnel package? I mean, you do have, I think what we have found out is they may have found something. I know you've made this point before. They may have found something during the spring, not stumbled into it. It wasn't like an accident. I think they had to do it a little bit more because of the personnel issues they had this spring. But some of these different fronts that they're running, I think they found out, hey, TJ Sanders can handle himself out on the edge. I mean, he did it in high school, right? Tonka Hemingway is versatile enough to where you can put him at any spot on the defensive line and he can play it. And so with somebody like Gear, now you're bringing him in, and you think of him, well, we want to play him at edge in a 4-man front. But, again, go back to his experience at Syracuse. It's not just some idea or concept. You're not just dreaming about the fact that, well, maybe he could play in a 3-man front and kind of line head up over a tackle. Well, no, he's done it. He did it at Syracuse. And so you're kind of adding another versatile body to that front.
Yeah, and to answer your question, my where does this guy play is firmly determined by who ends up being the answer to that question of who's in your top 4. Who's your best 4? So, in that scenario, TJ's got to be inside. But if Elijah Davis just builds off the spring, has a great summer. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself on this. Elijah could be a key rotational guy this year potentially, and not necessarily that has to start guy. But if he builds off the end of the spring and becomes that this guy's got to be on the field guy, then you got to make a decision. Now, where do those two guys, he and Tonka, who's better outside, who's better inside? So then that scenario, you got Strawn as an outside guy, and then you have TJ. I would think TJ and Tonka inside, and then probably actually Elijah, as well as Tonka did outside. Elijah, to me, looks incredibly comfortable and natural, sort of dipping his shoulder, bending off that edge, and making plays out there kind of in space. He's very comfortable in space for a bigger guy. So, again, we're talking spring game. This is off season. This is talking season, you know what. But I think that's your – now, if Boogie is the answer, then it's TJ and Boogie inside and then Tonka outside with Strawn. And, and they're going to do – some of this is going to be entirely determined by what personnel you want to use based on matchup. And, we saw them play some of these bigger guys outside, even in four-man fronts in the spring. So – I don't think you're going to see TJ out there, but we saw Elijah. And we saw TJ out there in the spring game, but I think that's more of a spring game thing. I don't think you're going to see that in real football. But, Elijah's out there playing true defensive end in a four-man front in the spring game. So I think it's a good problem to have, man. But if I'm the coaching staff, which I'm obviously not, I'm telling all those guys, like, hey, when you get back in June, end of May, whatever the date is, you got an all-out battle to be a starter, because it's not going to be who's the best defensive tackle or the best edge. It's going to be who are the four best defensive linemen, including edges and interior guys, and that's who we're putting on the field first.
There's probably two guys that are safe to be starters. Now, and when we say that, let's qualify that. That doesn't mean they can show up next month and say, Coach Beamer, I sat on the couch all month. I didn't work out. I'm just, so knowing what we know about these guys, that's not going to happen, right? But I feel like there's two guys that are probably pretty safe to be starter, and number one by a mile is Tonka Hemingway. He's starting somewhere. He's the best defensive lineman on the team. That's a very non-controversial statement, I think.
Yeah.
The next one is probably Strawn, because he's your most proven true edge.
Assuming
he's healthy.
Yes.
Okay. But so that's the other qualifier. But Tonka Hemingway is starting. Now that may be, we want you to start, and it may be week to week. Hey, you're starting this game at end. Hey, you're playing tackle.
Drive to drive.
Yeah, it could be drive to drive. Play to play. I mean, like, we're lining up this way on first down. On third down, we're lining up this way.
Yeah.
I mean, but I feel like Elijah Davis, TJ Sanders is an important one because his emergence and probably at tackle gives you more flexibility in addition to another good player. But Elijah Davis, like what was that? I know we saw the physical gifts in the spring game, and we know, like, to your point, you go back and look at his high school highlight tape, he's listed as a D-end/middle linebacker. So we know this is a big, fast, athletic guy for his size, and he can do some different things. But we also saw, like Brian Thomas Jr. looked like the best pass rusher in football, in the history of football in the spring game, right? So, I know you made this point already. Qualify it a little bit what we saw Elijah Davis in the spring game, but I think if you really listen closely to Shane Beamer in the post game of the spring game, and he was going back and talking about how Elijah, he kind of struggled a little bit when he came in, like getting acclimated. He seemed impressed too. And so knowing what we know about Elijah and his upside, I think that was a step forward in the right direction, and I think he's going to be able to carry that over and play potentially a very important role this season.
Guys, we obviously talked about in the last segment Gear committing at that edge position. Running back's another spot that we expect South Carolina to pull from in the transfer portal. Haven't gotten anything from there just yet, but you guys brought up the point in terms of future running backs. One of the highly sought-after prospects, Peyton Lewis out of Virginia, has recently released his top 6.
Yeah, he has, and Guys, I always think it's interesting when you get like the official, and by official these days, that means I put it on Twitter, essentially, with a graphic, right? You get the official top 6, and then you kind of have the official, unofficial, which maybe is what a prospect tells people on the record. Then you have the true unofficial. That's kind of like what we're hearing, I think.
Yes.
So Peyton Lewis, official, Twitter stamped top 6. Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Penn State, South Carolina, Tennessee. That is the starter kit of top recruiting schools in a lot of ways. Needs an Ohio State in there, I feel like.
Yeah.
But no surprise here that South Carolina makes the top 6. Peyton Lewis, as his official top group, has consistently said, Chris, South Carolina and Tennessee. So you have an SEC East battle here. I don't know that we've heard from Peyton Lewis here recently. I don't know what other schools have maybe entered the mix, like of those other 4, who else is kind of pushing to be in that top group. But he's consistently told, both myself a few months ago, I saw some Tennessee sites as well. It's kind of been South Carolina and Tennessee in various orders. I don't know exactly which one would probably be on top. Official visits are on deck. We expect him to visit both in June in an official capacity. And really, I would say Peyton Lewis is one of maybe 2 or 3 guys, maybe a 4th you could throw in there, that I would say are most likely to fill what I think are 2 spots for South Carolina at running back in this 2024 class.
And if we go into the science, since you started breaking that down, Wes, of the top groups, another one that you see is if you have a prospect that says I'm dropping my top 18, you can just throw that in the trash can for the most part. Like, he'll probably pick a school from that top 18, but it's not really worth paying attention to. Top 6, more manageable, much more reasonable. But even in that top 6, you generally you can take a look at it with what you know, either publicly, what you've heard, and you can say, all right, this is a little bit more like a top 3, and there's a few others that are kind of in there. And that can be a school that is kind of more lightly recruiting a prospect. He might be a little bit more down their board. Like, he has an offer, but they want to see a little more in camp. Maybe he's number 3, number 4 on their list. You also may have a school that they're not really considering super heavily. I think, and this is my opinion, but it's also based on a little bit of what we know, what we've observed. I think this is a little bit more of like a top 3. You've got I put Alabama, Florida, and Georgia a little bit farther back for various reasons. South Carolina obviously has had some pretty consistent buzz since they got involved with Peyton Lewis. He took a visit this spring that really, gave them some staying power, really solidified their status. Penn State is a school that you continue to hear some things with Peyton Lewis. And then Tennessee. Tennessee seems to be, to me, Wes, a pretty big one to watch. He's been on campus there this spring. As you said, they'll probably get a summer official visit, I would imagine, too. But we know he'll be back in Columbia, too. So we'll see how this shakes out. But I think even within this top 6, there's still a little bit of like I don't know what you would call it, maybe a line of demarcation a little bit between the ones to really, really watch and some of the other ones on this list.
I do think, not that this is necessarily the case right here, Chris, but you do see sometimes some schools get thrown into the mix because they look great being on the top 6.
Yeah, look, the Alabama logo looks great on this graphic.
Yeah, I mean, if Alabama sent me one piece of mail and I was a recruit,
oh yeah,
Alabama's going in the top group.
You're the top 2.
Yeah, just because, it looks good. Georgia's in there. Alabama's in there. It looks really good. But I think, ultimately, where am I deciding to go? I'm going to the place that wants me the most, assuming that they're somewhat on the same level. And in this case, you have a bunch of SEC schools, and then one sort of outlier in Penn State. And so I think if you're Peyton Lewis, you obviously have some SEC flavor to this. And he's a guy, Chris, that Carolina kind of had grabbed his attention already just based on the conversations. But then once he took that spring visit, you saw them sort of pop with him. and was very honest about, hey, I had a sort of a perception of what South Carolina was. And I think he liked Carolina a lot anyway, just based on building those relationships with the coaches without even meeting them. But we see this quite often covering recruiting with some out-of-state prospects who maybe haven't taken a bunch of visits. They get to South Carolina, they see the facilities, they see the stadium, they see how the campus has sort of grown, and the sort of athletic part of like the football part of campus that is technically off campus, and they're kind of blown away. And this was one of those situations with Lewis when he visited where that was the exact case.
Yeah, and when you look at kind of what he's looking for, I think he told you this, Wes, a place surrounded by great people who give positive energy and good charisma, positive type of learning environment. And that, in a lot of ways, not to say that South Carolina is the only school in the country that does that, but that really hits the notes that Shane Beamer's trying to play. And I think this is someone that is going to take a summer official, and we don't know yet, but South Carolina could be established as a team that's really tough to beat. We know that they're going to be in that top 2, top 3, but he's not as much just looking for, despite there being some brand name programs, right, in his top 6. He doesn't seem quite as concerned about that. Another thing to watch, I think, Wes, is, South Carolina is recruiting a few different backs. They've got a couple spots. What does he think about that? Like, how's the timeline line up? Like, Daniel Hill's out there. What if he committed to South Carolina in June?
Mm-hmm.
Just no indications that'll for sure happen, but what if it did? Would that affect things? Maybe. So we'll just have to see. But I think South Carolina is going to have a lot of staying power here with Peyton Lewis.
Tough weekend for South Carolina, obviously, as far as this matchup goes, y'all. Arkansas, very, very good in SEC play at home. I think I read they've maybe lost one game at home in SEC play. But kind of this is almost like when you go running back by committee, I feel like in football. This is like you're going pitcher by committee, and you're just saying you got to piece this thing together any way you can. And for South Carolina, this is probably the best way to do it right now. Like, I feel like if you have two just absolute studs and you have that traditional, hey, this guy's our ace, he's kind of our 1A, in a perfect world, on paper, Carolina goes into this season 1A, 1B, Will Sanders, Noah Hall, and you just know every Friday or Saturday, or if it's Thursday, Friday, every game 1, game 2, you're rolling your 2 guys out there. That's not where South Carolina is. You kind of have to accept it at this point. And, I thought Eli Jones in his start against Mississippi State looked good. It's kind of unfair to expect him to be that just shutdown, lockdown ace like you see traditionally. But I think right now what you're seeing is, hey, maybe have a little bit quicker hook, maybe approach this almost like a Major League Baseball team approaches a bullpen game, where you're just going to say, hey, put it together. If you have an opportunity, because South Carolina obviously got swept last week, if you have an opportunity to use Mahoney sort of today on Friday to win the game, so let's say it's the 5th inning and you feel good about it, then you put him in and you go win the game when you have a shot. If you're losing this game, then you save him for down the road. You cannot get swept again. I know you want to go win the series, but you cannot get swept again. So you have to use your weapons, as Kingston calls it, to win a game any way you can, and then hopefully find a way to steal the series.
Now, if that scenario, so the first scenario you said, so Eli Jones goes, let's say 5 innings, and South Carolina's in position to win. Hicks, the Arkansas native.
Oh, he's starting.
He's starting game 2.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering what you thought about bringing Hicks in game 1 to win the game. So a little bit of the reverse of what you said.
I mean, if you
bring Hicks in game 1 and then Mahoney 2.
Yeah, I mean, if you have to, I'd use them all 3 if it gets me a win. I'd go 3-3-3, honestly.
Yeah,
and then you deal with tomorrow when it gets here. I think
just need a game.
Yeah, if I think if it was locked in then they would already just named Hicks or Mahoney
Yeah.
your other starter. So they're going to piece it together. But my opinion is that Hicks gets the start on Saturday.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But if Jones goes 3 tonight, but it's 3 good ones, I mean, I truly believe if they had to go use all 3 guys, Jones, Hicks, Mahoney, in order to potentially win tonight, then I think they would do it without hesitation.
Yeah, like after 3, you're up 4-1.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Now the key, y'all, I think for South Carolina is, can you find a way to not be behind to start a game? Like they have been behind for 2 weeks straight.
Yeah.
It feels like you cannot play this game from behind. Like it doesn't work. You're constantly battling to get back into a game, and I feel like it's when you're struggling and when you're in a slump, it feels like you're always behind in the count, you're always behind in the game, and it's just no way to play with confidence. And it feels like at times, y'all, they have put so much effort into getting back in a game or to coming back, and then the opponent answers, then that's a tough way to live on the baseball diamond.
I think the unfair but realistic reality, I just used that word basically twice in a different way. South Carolina's reality right now, Wes, is, as you said, number one, the pitching staff is not as stable as it was at the beginning of the season. That's obvious. But I think number two, it is going to be up to the bats to carry South Carolina in a game like this. Arkansas is too good. They're good everywhere, right? But I think they're too good offensively. They're too good at home. You can't go into this weekend saying, all right, we're going to grind out a 3-2 win. That's just not, given where they're at as a pitching staff, I don't think that's realistic. So you're going to have to wake the bats up. They'll be a little healthier than they have been. We'll see. I still think we don't know exactly what that looks like, right, in terms of, exactly what they're going to have from a couple guys, how healthy they'll be. But the bats definitely have to wake up in this one. I mean, to your point earlier, they've been absolutely outstanding at home. They've won almost every game at home. They lost one game to Alabama. No word if Alabama bet on that game too. And
Allegedly.
And they lost a game randomly to Eastern Illinois. But I think the stat you gave earlier about having one SEC loss is correct. It looks like they've only lost 2 at home all year regardless. They lost the game to Lipscomb, and that was in Little Rock, actually. So they've been really good all year. Hey, if you are looking for some more Gamecock action today, how about the Gamecock softball team, Wes? We were just talking about that off air. We were not literally getting Wes's NASCAR picks. Although I'm randomly picking.
I didn't think so.
I'm picking Chase Elliott.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I have absolutely nothing behind that. I have a buddy who likes Chase Elliott, so we'll go with him. But Gamecock baseball on a little run, Wes. Or Gamecock baseball. They're on the opposite of a run. They need to make a run. Gamecock softball on a run. A couple wins in the SEC tourney. And so they're out. They're actually also out in Fayetteville, Arkansas at Bogle Park. And today's game day, 3 p.m. Central, so 4 Eastern. You can check them out. Looks like it's on ESPN2, and they are playing Auburn. Went to extras yesterday against Georgia.
Second straight day, right? That they went to extras?
Second straight day. First one went to – that wasn't yesterday. I think that was the first game maybe went into a weather delay, and then they came back. Did some good stuff. Dugout Donnie, as Dawn Staley has coined her, was on the mound yesterday, did a great job. And then former Garnet Trust Hour guest, Brooke Blankenship, Gamecock shortstop, coming through with what ended up being a double to score run number 2, and then came home with the win. So on a little run, play Auburn today, 3 p.m. Central, 4 Eastern.
Speaking of Dugout Donnie, great name. She was also today named first team All-SEC. So congrats to her. There are 21 student athletes on the first team for the All-SEC team in softball. And, Chris, I knew she had a great year, or is having a great year. It's not over yet. But had a no-hitter earlier in the year, last month actually. First time for a Carolina pitcher in SEC play since 2002. One hitter against Florida when she struck out 15. She had a 2-hit shutout over number 23 Texas A&M last month. So she is having a year. And like you said, I mean, I feel like when you play SEC ball in baseball or softball, guys, it's just so, like, to steal Chris's favorite phrase, the margin for error is so small that you can be humbled for a stretch like we're seeing from Carolina baseball right now, but it does harden you. And if you can get sort of, in these sports, one little thing, and momentum and confidence and just a little bit of luck along the way are so important in both baseball and softball. And we're seeing, there were struggles for this softball team along the way at times going through conference play. They had moments where they looked really good, moments where they had some skids, but they seem to be playing their best ball at the right time, which obviously is what you want to do in any sport.
Yeah, it is. And if you look at the bracket, by the way, you may be wondering, well, where exactly are they? Where is the Gamecock softball team in terms of just in the bracket? Playing Auburn today again for Eastern. That's actually a semifinal game, so they'll have a chance on ESPN2 to make it to the SEC Tourney Finals. Other teams still in the mix. Florida and Tennessee are actually playing right now, and they are in the top of the third. Tennessee, who is the number 1 seed, a really, really good team this year. They've only lost 8 games all season, 5 in conference. They're up 3-0. And so the waiting on the other side of the bracket is Alabama West. Montana Fouts, who is their incredible pitcher, actually had a knee injury yesterday. We don't really know the status of her. But, so South Carolina, Auburn, Alabama, the 3 still in it. And then Florida and Tennessee, the winner of that game will be the 4th. So South Carolina making a little bit of a run, see where it goes.
Tyler, another Darlington question for you. Do we know what they're feeding you guys?
That I don't know. There's always good food and snacks in the media center. Again, I haven't left this room too much since I've been here this morning, so I will venture out and see what I can find. But you can always find good food at the racetrack, I'll tell you that much.
Do you need us to bring you Firehouse Subs?
If I can't get anything here, I got a bit of a drive back a little bit later on. I will be sure to get a Firehouse Sub at some point today.
Yeah, make sure you do that.
Guys, all right, so first of all, Tyler, I'm disappointed you didn't have any good food down there yet. So I'm ordering you at this point as your friend to go get out of that closet and check out what's going on. They've had you cooped up in there for too long. Go enjoy this experience. I know you'll have a good time. But I got to close out the week. I got the most random story ever for you.
Oh, here we go.
All right, so I know we don't have long. So I'm in Greenville yesterday, right? And I dropped by the Welcome Home Tour thing with Beamer. We are at all those to just see what Beamer has to say. The one newsy thing he said, Marquis Anderson will play this year. I think we knew it was maybe heading that way, but he confirmed that for sure. But so I go get some barbecue after, right? And so I'm in line, very long line at this barbecue spot, and I'm waiting, and I'm looking a couple of people up for me. And I'm like, I know this guy. Who is this guy? And I could give y'all 1,000 guesses as to who, and there are Gamecock connections here, as to who I'm 95% sure was standing 2 spots in front of me at this. And I did not get to confirm. I didn't want to be that guy. But I am almost convinced, and I have no idea why he would be here, that Darren Horn was standing 2 spots in front of me at the barbecue restaurant in Greenville, South Carolina.
He might have been also coming back. He might have just wanted to catch up with some old peeps at the Welcome Home Tour. Was he there?
I can 100% guarantee that was not it.
He was not there. Did you check everybody? We'll get the investigative team on this over the weekend and have to report back.
Yep,
maybe he was just there for some really good barbecue.
Yeah,
could be
all the way from Kentucky to Greenville. How about that?
You never know.
An important message from Blue Ridge Hospice. There may be several hospices now claiming to serve the area, but Blue Ridge Hospice is the only local hospice that has been serving here for 40 plus years, operates the only hospice inpatient care center, conducts the only community-wide grief and bereavement programs, offers a nationally recognized music therapy program in conjunction with Shenandoah University, outscores every other Virginia hospice in Medicare's quality scores, and so much more. Blue Ridge Hospice, the first, the best. Find out more at blueridgehospice.org.